Hello, my name is Mr. Ambrose, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the 10-mark questions on the higher RMPS exam. We're going to go through what to expect, what sort of questions you might get on the 10-mark questions. We're also going to look at potential structures that you could use to answer the questions. We're also going to look at the different skills that are required to answer the 10-mark question and maximise your marks that you'll be getting as well. I've also got a couple of examples that we'll look through as well. So we'll go through those and we'll see where the marks are given. So learning intentions is to explore the higher RMPS 10-mark questions. And we're going to also consolidate knowledge of the skills needed for a 10-mark answer. So we're probably going to, you probably already know what to expect on a 10-mark question. We're just going to review those skills and that are required as well. So success criteria: to review and practice the skills required in the answer for a 10-mark question, to understand possible structures for a 10-mark answer, and also we're going to identify the skills in example answers as well. So lesson symbols. Throughout the lesson, you will see various symbols on the slides to indicate what you should do. Here are symbols which may be used and what they mean. We've got the listen symbol, we've got the speak repeat symbol, we've got the read symbol, we've got the write and copy symbol, we've got the correct your work symbol, and we've also got the pause video to complete task symbol as well. We'll mainly be using the listen, read, write, copy, and pause symbols in this slides. You will need a paper and a pencil or a pen to write some ideas down or to make some notes if you wish as well. Okay, so 10-mark questions on the higher RMPS paper. In the final exam, you'll be asked to complete 2 10-mark questions. Okay, both of them are in paper 1. Okay, so there's 2 sections to paper 1. There's a world religion and there's a morality and belief. So one 10-mark question will be on the world religions. That will be Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism, or Hinduism, whichever you studied in class. And the second 10-mark question will be in the morality and belief section. And again, you'll have studied a particular topic within that morality and belief section. So you'll find your topic and you'll go to there and you'll be asked to answer one 10-mark question. There are no 10-mark questions in paper 2, which is the religious and philosophical questions. You will just get one 20-mark question on that. So you will not need to answer a 10-mark question for paper 2. The mark breakdown for a 10-mark question is there are 6 knowledge understanding marks, I will call them KU, and there are also 4 analysis marks available for you as well. There'll be a maximum of 4 out of 10 if there is no analysis, so you can't just write 6 KU marks and hope to get 6 out of 10. You'll only be able to get 4 out of 10. So you need to get analysis to maximize the knowledge understanding marks as well. And the target time is 22.5 minutes. Now, that probably should include also some time for you to read over what you've written as well, and maybe have a think at the beginning, have a think about what you're going to write. So you could write down a plan as well. The target time is 22 minutes and a half. Okay. So we'll go through a couple of the skills that we'll need, the knowledge and standard analysis, and what we actually mean by each of those things. So the first skill is knowledge and understanding, or KU. What is that? So the SQA describes KU as the what. Okay, so this is just factual information, quotes, things like that. Okay, so it would include factual information if it's got to be accurate and relevant. So by that we mean accurate means it's got to be correct. What you're saying has got to be correct. It can't be incorrect in any way or inaccurate. And it's also got to be relevant. So if the question is asking about a certain thing, you can only get KU marks for things that answer the question or are relevant to the question. Okay? You can't bring in something from a different topic if it is unrelated and get a KU mark. So it's got to be accurate and relevant. Quotations. So you can use a quote as long as it's accurately cited, and you will get a mark for that. Again, it's got to be relevant to what you're saying. Okay, so with quotations, you could say something like, in the Bible it says turn the other cheek, in which case you get a mark for that because you said the Bible. If you said Christians believe turn the other cheek, then you wouldn't get a mark for that because you need to cite it to say it's from the Bible. Okay. Same if you're using a quote from a person, you could say something like Jesus said this, or whatever it was, whatever the quote is. As long as you said that, that's fine. Okay. You can also get marks for statistics. So if there's facts or figures and things that you want to bring into your answer, that's absolutely fine. You might want to use that in your morality and belief section. That can work really nicely for that section. Again, it's got to be accurately cited, so you've got to say where it's come from or who is saying that particular fact as well. Okay. Case studies too. Okay, so if there's a story or something's happened that you think is relevant to the question that you're answering, you can talk about that like a real life situation that you can describe. Again, it's got to be relevant to the question, which means that it's got to be related to what you're talking about or what you've asked to answer. Descriptions of moral issues. Okay, so again, if you're describing something like organ donation, then you can describe that, and you will get describe what actually organ donation is, and different types of organ donation, maybe where it's allowed, where it's not allowed. You would get marks for all of those things as well. Descriptions of religious or non-religious viewpoints. Okay, so for example, if you said some Christians believe that life is sacred, then that would, and you explain that a little bit further, and you would get a mark for that. Okay, so it's a good idea to say as well, some Christians believe this, okay, rather than all Christians believe that. So it's just good practice to put that in, because there's a lot of different views within a religion. And in a 10-mark question, there are 6 KU marks available. I've already mentioned that, but just to highlight that, 60% of the marks. Okay, so there's a lot of marks available for that in terms of percentage as well. Okay, so let's have a look at a particular example, and let's have a think about where we could get KU marks in this particular question. So the example question is, analyze the religious responses to moral issues arising from deterrence. Now, this is from the morality and justice section of the course, which means that the people doing this morality and justice would have to answer this question. But you might not be doing morality and justice in your section, but a question similar to this might come up for your moral issue. Okay. So KU marks will be given for descriptions of moral issues arising from deterrence. Okay, so in this question you could say one moral issue arising from deterrence is, and then have a think about what moral issue could be arisen from that. As long as you describe that in enough detail, that would get you a mark. Descriptions of religious views on deterrence. Okay, so if you wanted to say Christians believe this about deterrence, or Muslims would believe this about deterrence, or so forth, then you would get marks for that as well. Quotations from religious groups about deterrence, okay, so from religions, okay. So it can be from a person or a religious text, that would get you marks as well. And then any case studies too. So if there was an example of a situation where a religious person was discussing deterrence or being involved with a situation that links to deterrence, you could describe that as well and get a mark for that. Okay, so let's have a look at where examples of them would get KU marks for this. Okay, so it's the same question again. Analyze the religious responses to moral issues arising from deterrence. So here are some examples below where you would get marks. Okay, so the first one is, one moral issue arising from deterrence is the harshness of punishment. People who support deterrence would usually agree that harsh punishments are more likely to deter people from committing a crime in the first place. Okay, so I'll get a KU mark. So there the person has described a moral issue arising from deterrence. Another example is the second one here. Some Christians would not support deterrence because they would be likely to support proportionate punishments that would help the offender rather than cause unfair suffering. So again, they've described there a religious view on deterrence, and they have described it in enough detail, and it's accurate as well. So that will get you a KU mark. Another example would be a quote, and this one here says, some Jews would look to the teaching of an eye for an eye from the Torah. Okay, so that would get a mark because they've used an accurate quote and they've cited it saying it's from the Torah. Okay, so all of those would get you a KU mark. Okay, so what about our second skill, which is analysis? Okay, so what is analysis? The SQA describes analysis as the why. Okay, so KU would be the what, and this analysis would be the why. So this includes interpretation of relevant sources, beliefs, or viewpoints. Okay, so that means sort of if you have a belief and then sort of interpreting it and linking it to issues, interpreting it in a certain way, saying Christians might believe this or humanists might believe this because of this source. Okay, the SQA are really keen for you to know that analysis is more than just the use of this means or this shows. Candidates must explain implications, consequences, or impacts. That's sort of what happens because of that belief as well. So if you say a Christian believes this, and because of that they would do this, or they would also believe this, or they would support this, or they would oppose this, or whatever. Making sure you show that there's something after just the belief. Okay. Linking viewpoints or perspectives to issues. That's kind of similar to the second point there, interpretation. So you said, here's a quote from the Quran, and here's how it links to organ donation or whatever the issue is you've been asked to talk about. Okay, and then you're showing that link. Sometimes the link there is really, really obvious. For example, if you're talking about in the Bible it says, "You shall not kill." Okay, and you say you're trying to apply that to capital punishment, for example. Well, it's really obvious that, isn't it? That thou shalt not kill. You should be against capital punishment. But actually, you need to explain that, even if it's really obvious. Okay, you need to explain it to get the mark. You can also get analysis marks for comparing and contrasting as well. So if you have two religious views and there's some differences or similarities, or if there's a religious and non-religious view that you've been asked to talk about, again, comparing and contrasting, saying this is different because, or this is the same as this because, okay, you get analysis marks for that too. And in a 10-mark question, there are 4 analysis marks available, which is 40% of the marks. Okay, so making sure we're doing those 4 different points, analysis points, to get to the maximum marks. Remember, if you don't do analysis, you can only get a maximum of 4 KU marks as well. Okay, so if we look at our question again, analyse the religious responses to moral issues arising from deterrence. There are a few things that you could do to get analysis marks here. So you could do interpretations of relevant religious sources, beliefs, or viewpoints on deterrence. Okay, so you can say, here's what a Christian believes, and here's a source, and trying to interpret that. This means that a Christian would believe whatever. Okay, because of that source or that belief. Linking a religious viewpoint or source to deterrence. So saying, here's a quote, and here's how it links to deterrence, or here's how it's against deterrence, for example. Okay. And compare and contrast religious viewpoints to other religious viewpoints on deterrence. So here's what Christians believe, here's what Buddhists believe, and how they're different as well, or how they're similar. Okay, so here's an example that we looked at before. The KU mark that we looked at before was some Jews would look to the teaching of an eye for an eye from the Torah. Okay, so that will get you a mark if you're talking about deterrence. Okay. Now, to get the analysis mark, this person has linked it to deterrence, explained the link of the teaching of an eye for an eye to deterrence. What's that link there? Okay, this links to deterrence because the teaching of an eye for an eye supports a very clear and definite punishment for any crime. This supports deterrence as clear punishments for crimes are effective in stopping people from doing the crime in the first place. Okay, so that person said, an eye for an eye has a really clear punishment for a crime. It's proportionate. So therefore, a person who supports deterrence would like that, because people who support deterrence like clear punishments, because you know what you're going to get. It puts people off doing the crime. Okay, so that link there has been made, and the person has got an analysis mark. Okay, another example here. This is again the same question. Analyse the religious responses to moral issues arising from deterrence. And this person has said some Christians would not support deterrence because they would be likely to support proportionate punishments that would help the offender rather than cause unfair suffering. Okay, so that would get you a KMU mark, as I said before. Now, this person has gone for an implication, consequence, impact, okay, sort of analysis mark. An implication of this viewpoint is that Christians will be more likely to support punishments that help reform the offender and allow them to return to society and contribute. These include such things as counselling or community payback. Okay, so that person there has said, what would a Christian do because of this belief? Well, they'd probably be more likely to support reform or support the offender to become a better person. And the example of that would be counselling or community payback. Okay, so that person's linked. They said this is what the implication is. Here's what a Christian would do because of that teaching. Okay, so that gets you an analysis mark as well. Okay, so a quick learning check so far. I just want you to have a think about what we've just been through in the slides already. I want you to pause the video and consider the questions below. Number 1, what is knowledge and understanding? KU. What is analysis? How many marks are available for each skill in a 10-mark question? And how many 10-mark questions are there on the final exam? Some easy questions there, but just to make sure you've learned everything. Now, I'm not going to go through the answers on this. If you're not sure, just have a quick look back on the slides, and you can find the answers there. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about some tips that I give to people for when they're answering a 10-mark question. Some of these can be applied to every question you're going to answer on the RMPS higher paper. Some of them are just for the 10-mark question as well. Okay, so it is very important that you make sure that you are answering the question at all times. Okay, so making sure that you know what the question is asking you to do, making sure you're answering that, you're not going off topic, you're not going in a bit of a diversion or anything like that. Make sure that you are on point at all times and making sure you answer the question. Now, this might seem obvious, but not understanding not understanding what the question is asking you to do might mean you answer the wrong question. I've had pupils before answer a question really, really well, but actually they're not answering the question that's asked. They've written a really nice answer, but it's to a different question. Okay, so make sure that you are talking about the question that's been asked there. Remember that point at the beginning, say that any KU marks got to be accurate and relevant. Okay, so if they're not relevant, if you're answering a different question. There are a few tips you can keep in mind to make sure that you're doing this. So you could keep on referring back to or mirroring the question. So if it's asking you to analyse the importance of something, you could keep on using the word important or the significance. Keep on using the word significant. If it's asking you to analyse the relationship between a belief and a practice, then you can keep on using the term the relationship here is, or the link between, okay, to show that you're actually answering the question. And keep on referring to the two things that you're asked to refer to as well. If it's a question on morality and justice, then again, making sure that you're mirroring the question, you're talking about what's been asked of you as well. So it's analyse the moral issues arising. You keep on saying one moral issue arising this is this. Okay, one moral issue arising is that another one. Okay, so making sure you're answering the question too. One really good tip is to underline or highlight the important parts of the question. Okay, you're allowed to write on the question paper as well as the answer paper. So if you have a highlighter or a pen, you can underline the particular points particular words in the question that you think would help you focus as well. Rereading parts or all of your answer if you have time. Okay, remember you've got 22.5 minutes to answer a question, to answer a 10-mark question. If you have time to do that, make sure you have a quick read through, even if it's just through a part of it, just to make sure that you've made the point you wanted to as well. Now, I've done another video on the 20-mark question, and you can see examples of underlining or highlighting the question in the 20-mark question video. So I won't go through what I mean by the highlighting or underlining of the question. Have a look at the 20-mark question video, and there's some examples there of me going through that as well. Okay, so our next tip or our next thing we're going to go through is structure. Okay, it's really important to have a think about structure in your 10-mark question answer. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this, and recently the SQA have released a study guide, and they've talked about a couple of structures that you could use in that study guide, and also that there are different ways of answering as well. Okay, so we're going to go through some of those types of structures and see which might suit you in terms of the type of question. Okay, so it's good to have a few different options that you have to go out, so you can use as many different options as you can. Okay, so if you have just one particular structure you have in mind, it might not suit the type of question. It's good to have more than one. Okay, so a quick note: there is no one correct way to structure an answer. Okay, it's not one size fits all. It depends on the question, depends on the person as well. It depends if you're going for an A or a C or whatever. It's just you've got to make sure that you're reading the question and selecting the right structure that's appropriate as well. However, markers are trained to identify KU analysis wherever it appears on your answer. Okay, so even if you don't use a structure, it's useful. You'll still pick up KU analysis marks. Okay, because the markers will be able to pick that up. However, it's still useful to have a structure, as it will help you think about what you'll write, and it will help with time management as well. Okay, so if you know you're going to write 3 paragraphs, you can say in paragraph 1 I'll write about this, paragraph 2 I'll write about that, paragraph 3 I'll do this. Okay, so you know what you're going to write about. If you're going to write 2, again, you know how to structure that as well, and it does save you time. Okay, because if you haven't got a structure, you could think to yourself, have I done enough? I'm not sure. Okay, so a structure is useful for saving time and helping you plan as well. Now, I said this in another video as well. If you have been told by your teacher to use a particular structure in an answer in a certain way, you should continue to do that. Okay, so if they've told you to do 3 paragraphs, 2 paragraphs, whatever it is, instruction, then continue to use that if you're comfortable with it. These are just further suggestions for you to use as well. Okay. Okay, so as I said before, the SQA have released a study guide that you can get on the higher RMPS SQA page. Okay, so you can access that. That's freely available to everyone as well. Now, this comes straight from that study guide, so you might have read this already, but it's worth us going through it again. So this is what it actually says on the study guide. There are some tips and suggestions about how to structure answers in the SQA study guide. Okay, so part 1, world religion. So remember, you have one 10-mark question on world religion. So it says in the study guide, if you are asked to analyse the relationship between 2 beliefs, 2 practices, or a belief and a practice, make sure that you give clear knowledge and understanding, KU, points for the belief and or practice identified in the question. Okay, so that means that if you're asked to talk about a certain belief, you have to add in as many KU marks you can, sort of 3, I would say. 3 KU marks about the belief, and then another 3 about the other belief or practice that you're talking about. You must also clearly explain the ways in which they are linked. Use the wording from the question to help you do this. Okay, so that's showing the link between the 2, that would be analysis, and you're looking for 4 analysis marks as well. So an example of a good structure for this style of 10-mark question would be paragraph 1, make 3 KU points for the first belief and or practice, and then paragraph 2, make 3 KU points for the second belief and or practice. And then paragraph 3 is when your analysis comes in, you make 4 analysis points and explain the relationship between the 2. Okay. Now, this type of structure, I haven't got an example for this. There is on this video, but you can see an example answer using this structure in the video on the SQA study guide. Okay, available on the Forth Valley West Lothian RIC YouTube channel. I made that video, and there's an example on that video of using this structure. Okay, so I won't go through it again now. You can skip over to that video to have a look at that if you want. Okay, the study guide goes on to say about the world religion as well, is if you are asked to analyse the purpose of living according to a belief or practice, make sure that you clearly explain the reasons why a religious person has this belief or carries out this practice. Use the wording from the question to help you do this. Okay, so again, that's a different type of question you might get. Analyse the purpose of living by a certain belief or practice. Okay, So that's not the same as comparing two beliefs or two practices or a belief and practice. I'm showing the link between them. It's about talking about living according to certain belief or practice. So it might be a little bit different. So the SQA suggests paragraph 1, it would be make 6 KU points about the belief or practice. Okay, so I'm just going to pick an example from Islam because I teach Islam in my class. If the question was analyze the purpose of living according to the 5 pillars of Islam, then you could make the first paragraph 6 KU points about the 5 pillars of Islam, and then the second paragraph would be your analysis, make 4 analysis points explaining the purpose of living according to the belief or practice. Okay, so why do Muslims live according to the 5 pillars as well? Okay, so that would be sort of 2 paragraphs there. All your KU in one paragraph, 6 KU points, and all your analysis in the second paragraph. Okay, and that does split it up nicely as well. Okay, so that's for the world religion. So there's 2 different types of questions you might get for the world religion section. You'll get analyze the relationship between a belief and a practice, okay, or a belief and a belief, or a practice and a practice, okay. Or a second type of question you might get is analyze the purpose of living according to, and then the belief or the practice. The morality and belief is a little bit different. Okay, of course you get a 10-mark question there, but there is no specific structure mentioned in the SQA guide for the morality and belief section. Okay, they do say the following though. For the 10-mark question, it is important that you read the question carefully, identify which area of the course you're being asked to analyse, and whether you are being asked to analyse religious and or non-religious responses. So that's interesting there that they say religious and or non-religious. So you could be asked to analyse a religious and non-religious viewpoint on a particular moral issue. Okay, so be prepared for that as well. So you might be asked a religious, a non-religious, or a religious and a non-religious in the same question. Okay, so you have to make sure you have both. If you're asked to analyse responses, it is good practice to identify which religious and or non-religious viewpoint you are using in your answer. Avoid using generic terms such as some people. Instead, specify who you are referring to. For example, some Buddhists. Okay, so that's really important as well to be accurate in your who you're talking about to. Okay, so I thought it'd be useful for us to look through an example 10-mark answer where we can identify the KU and the analysis in the person's answer. Now the question is, analyse religious responses to moral issues arising from sexual relationships. So this is from the morality and relationships section of the course. So you might not be doing that section, but it'd still be useful for us to go through this and see where the KU and the analysis would be given. Now, the best thing to do in this one is to just assume that everything that they've written here is correct and to see where the KU and the analysis would be. Now, this is part 1. This is the first 2 paragraphs of 3. The next paragraph is on the next slide, and we'll go through that in a moment's time as well. Okay, so I'll read this out, and then you can pause the video, and you can think about where you would give the KU and the analysis marks for this particular answer. Okay. So, analyse religious responses to moral issues arising from sexual relationships. Okay. I guess the first thing to think about here is, what is this question asking you to do? So you could be highlighting, for example, religious responses, moral issues arising from, and sexual relationships. Okay, so that's the sort of things that you'd be looking at to answer. Okay. So it's useful to talk about religious responses. It's useful to mention what the question is asking you to talk about the moral issues arising from, and this topic is sexual relationships as well. Okay, so let's read through the answer. So one moral issue arising from sexual relationships is underage sex. The legal age of consent in the UK is 16, so having sex before this is considered morally unacceptable. Many Christians believe that sex should take place within a marriage for the purpose of bringing new life into the world. An implication of this moral issue is that young people who are generally unmarried should not be having underage sex, and they are not mentally or emotionally ready for the commitment involved in marriage or raising children. Another issue arising from sexual relationships is adultery. Adultery is when a person has a sexual relationship with someone who is not their spouse or partner. Adultery can lead to a breakdown of the family in terms of financial, lifestyle, or emotional upheaval. Most Christians would strongly disapprove of adultery because they believe that marriage is a sacred institution that must be respected as such. One of the Ten Commandments found in the Old Testament states, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." A consequence of this response to the moral issue is that Christians are taught when marrying you are making a promise to God as well as to each other. As a result, by being unfaithful to your spouse, you are turning your back on God and devaluing the sacred oath you have made. Okay, so pause the video here and have a think about where you would give the KU marks and the analysis marks there. Okay, so this is the final paragraph of the answer. Okay, so it says, a final issue arising from sexual relationships is consent. Consent is legally required before you engage in a sexual act with another person. Most Christians would strongly agree that consent should always be sought when engaging in a sexual relationship because the act of sex is a way of showing love between two people. An implication of this response is that sex without consent is an act of violence and therefore cannot be justified by Christians who reject violence in favour of loving kindness. So again, pause the video and have a think about where you would give the KU marks and the analysis. Once you've done that, add up how many KU marks you give and how many analysis marks you give and give it a total out of 10. Remember, 6 KU marks available and 4 analysis marks. Okay, pause the video and have a think about it now. Okay, so let's go through some of the where the marks would be given for this particular answer. Okay, so you can see here there's quite a few different marks in different places, so we'll go through each of these marks and why they were given. So the first one is one moral issue arising from sexual relationships is underage marriage. The legal age of consent in the UK is 16, so having sex before this is considered morally unacceptable. Okay, so the person there gets a KU mark because they have outlined a moral issue arising from sexual relationships. That's a KU mark. Many Christians believe that sex should take place within a marriage for the purpose of bringing new life into the world. An implication of this moral issue is that young people who are generally unmarried should not be having sex underage, and they are not mentally or emotionally ready for the commitment involved in marriage or raising children. Okay, so you get an analysis mark there because the person has outlined an implications or a consequence of that belief from Christians as well. Okay, so next paragraph. Another issue arising from sexual relationships is adultery. Adultery is when a person has a sexual relationship with someone who is not their spouse or partner. Okay, so the person gets a KU mark there because again they've outlined one of the moral issues and what adultery actually is. Adultery can lead to a breakdown of the family in terms of financial, lifestyle, or emotional upheaval. So the person again gets a KU mark there for further describing what adultery is. Most Christians would strongly disapprove of adultery because they believe that marriage is a sacred institution and must be respected as such. So again, the KU mark there for outlining the Christian view and why they believe that as well. One of the Ten Commandments found in the Old Testament states, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." So again, you get a KU mark there because you used the correct quote, which is accurate, and also you say it's from the Ten Commandments and the Old Testament. So I think that would be enough to get you to correctly cite the quote as well. Okay, a consequence of this response to the moral issue is that Christians are taught when marrying, you are making a promise to God as well as to each other. As a result, by being unfaithful to your spouse, you are turning your back on God and devaluing the sacred oath you have made. Okay, so again, an analysis mark there because the person has outlined a consequence, what happens after because of that belief as well. So they've outlined that consequence really well, given a good explanation of that too, to get an analysis mark for that. So far we're sitting on 5 KU marks and 2 analysis marks, so doing really well from that. Okay, so the final paragraph here, it says a final issue arising from sexual relationship is consent. Consent is legally required before you engage in a sexual act with another person, so KU mark for that. So again, they've outlined what the issue is and what consent actually is as well. Most Christians would strongly agree that consent should always be sought when engaging in a sexual relationship because the act of sex is a way of showing love between two people. Okay, again, the KU marks you've outlined a religious view. The implication of this response is that sex without consent is an act of violence and therefore cannot be justified by Christians who reject violence in favour of loving kindness. Okay, so again, the person's explained the implication of this view that Christians have and what they would do instead of that they would view it as an act of violence. So instead, they try and show loving kindness as well. Okay, so you get an analysis mark for that as well. So overall, there's 6 out of 6 for KU analysis, 3 out of 4, so only 3 analysis marks. So that'll be 9 out of 10. Now you might notice that there was 7 KU marks given there. Of course, you only get a maximum of 6, so that extra mark wouldn't count. Okay, you still only get 6 KU marks and 3 analysis. That'd be 9 out of 10. Okay, so I think that answer is quite doable. It's quite reasonable. It's three paragraphs, and you've talked about just the Christian view. I've talked about all different religious views, and it was quite straightforward. Reasonable quote, which was good. So yeah, I think this is quite an achievable 9 out of 10 for this question as well. Okay, so this is the last slide on the video today. Just going to give you some tips, some next steps of what you could do to help you in your preparation for the exam. You could review this PowerPoint and any notes that you have made. So hopefully you've written some things down here about what you've learned, and you can apply those to your revision as well and to your preparation. You could look over potential 10-mark questions that might come up in the exam. What is your plan for these questions? Okay, so think about what you've seen in this video, or maybe in some more recent past papers. You could ask your teacher as well for some example 10-mark questions, and you should think about what would I write about if that question came up, or you can make your own question based on the sort of the questions you've seen in this video as well. How would you answer those questions if they came up? What's your plan for those questions as well? Have a think about timed answers. Okay, a really good way to prepare. Now, as well as knowledge and analysis as well, you've got to be really tight on the time too. You've only got 22.5 minutes, including a plan and including having to read over it again. So you could have a go at writing a 10-mark question, maybe one that you feel comfortable with, and you can have a go at writing that out in 22.5 minutes, see how you get on. Because if you overshoot that, you might lose time on the questions. So it's really important, really well managed and tight on the time as well. Look over any 10-mark questions you've done in class. How could they be improved? Okay, so if there a 10-mark question you've done in class previously, you could have a look at the feedback you got from your teacher. You could have a think about how you can improve that. Could you structure it differently? Could you add different detail? Could you add different analysis in there? What would you add? Maybe you might be thinking I wrote too much there. Okay, what can you take out of it to still get maximum marks, but to save some time maybe? So how could it be improved? You could offer to cross-mark a friend's work as well. If you've got a friend in the class, you could ask them, do you want me to mark each other's work? Maybe if you do a timed answer, you give it to them, and then you can compare where you give the KU and analysis marks as well. That's a really good way to prepare, because it gives you the opportunity to write an answer, but also gets you to think about what your friend would have written as well. Maybe if you even think about a question that you could both answer, a similar question, or the same question even, and how you'd answer that, and that'd be good for comparing too. So all there is left to say is good luck in your preparation and your revision. I hope the exam goes well for you, and I hope the questions that you want come up as well. So good luck, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.